Hi, my name is Chris. I am the lead developer on our senior project Crimson Crush with my teammate and partner Christine Hauser. I mostly handle the um, programming and more of the development side of things. Christine is primarily UI UX and design, and then there are aspects of game design that we both go over together. Now, our project is primarily a match 3 game, very similar to games like Candy Crush, Saga, and things of that nature. Um, it does have a few other thing challenges and tricks that we try to throw in there for the user, and it is themed towards NMSU, so which is the alma mater or soon to be alma mater of Christine and I. So that is kind of the project we've been working on. We chose a game because it does display a lot of different aspects and challenges for both of our skill sets and our responsibilities. Um, and it also is a web based game, so we wanted to make it primarily optimized and highly performative for a multitude of devices, but we're mostly catering it towards mobile. So, due to its nature of being PWA or progressive web application, it will run extremely fast on just about every type of device. With even like older devices, it's cross operating system, so it can do iOS or Android. And so it was just a really good decision for that. Now, had it been a different type of game, um, with a little more complexity, like an RPG or a roguelite or anything like that, then yes, we would have had way too many game objects to try to keep track of. In which case, there are other game engines that would have been uh, more optimized for that. So that's why we chose what we did. It does, and it also allows us to kind of keep it all in one suite, so it's all within our web application. So it allows us to also implement um, our website, which we've catered to be primarily mobile friendly, and also allows us to look into things like authorization authentication and have user registration for high scores and things like that. So while the game can be played, um, technically it's of course it's client side, like any game has to be, due to tracking user input, delta time, things like that. It does have an aspect of server side rendering heavily because we use Next.js, but we felt that this type of game and what we're doing, was a small enough project where we could handle it versus building like an RPG or something like that would take two people, especially with us divvying up the responsibilities like that would take probably years. So the scope was still small enough, and it allowed us to really kind of showcase a lot of different challenges, problems that we'll have to overcome, both on the web development side as well as the game development side. Right. So today we're really in the testing phase, so we're kind of getting towards the tail end of things. A lot of it just has to do with just finding bug issues, security issues, things like that. Just making sure that it runs smoothly and ultimately that it's fun. At the end of the day, it's got to be. The whole point of this is to make it just something fun, quick, a very standard core game loop that's already been proven to work. And so, where we really need to be for launch is, Christine has finished a lot of the UI UX. So I've just been implementing it and just making sure everything runs correctly. When I first started the prototype before Christine finished her designs, it was very very boring. It looked like a 2001 Yahoo page. But like anything with development, art and design always takes the longest by far. It's probably the most difficult part of the whole process. And so I was just making sure things were functioning appropriately. Um, and Christine finished it very actually pretty quickly, and we were able to get a lot of that in there. But right now we're just polishing it up, making sure the animations work correctly. our sprite sheets. We're gonna make sure they're finalized and ready to go. And then we also have to make sure that there's no issues in terms of like the special events that players can kind of accomplish while they're in there, like a match 5, for instance. We need to make sure that they work appropriately. So a lot of it's just testing right now, making sure there's nothing that breaks the game, keeps it fun for the user, and also focusing on making sure it's mobile first. So that was kind of the first, I guess, 1.0 is going to focus heavily on making sure it's mobile ready. That's the big thing, because that's where I believe it's something like 95% of people playing games are mostly doing it on a phone. And you could, I remember reading about that, just in general, the vast majority of applications are accessed in mobile. So that's where a lot of that's why, unfortunately, the game industry has kind of shifted and focused in that direction. And it's very, very normal. But we're hoping to just kind of get our feet wet, see how it works, and of course make sure everything hits the ground running. Our OKRs are pretty straightforward in terms of what we're trying to do. So our primary objective is to make sure it's polished and stable. So we want to make sure it runs smoothly. There's no like severe bugs. Of course, we don't have a huge team, of testers, right? So that can find every little thing. But we're trying our best to try to figure out different ways users can do things, and see if there's any sort of issues, and then try to fix those. We are optimizing the game as much as possible, so we're trying to utilize like sprite sheets, for instance, was a pretty early decision just because of how optimized they are. Keeping kind of everything on one sprite sheet, so the user's phone really only has to it pretty much stores it inside the client, and then on the device, and then for any future time the user will kind of load it in. It'll already be there, and then due to us using sprite sheets, there's really it looks like things are going crazy, but they're really not, as opposed to traditional ways of doing things, which was like you have to like actually render in objects and then store these objects somewhere, or even worse, you could actually delete them and then have to create new ones. That causes a lot of runtime issues. But we really focused on optimizing it to make it smooth, kind of to that point where it's not, anyone can run it even on much older devices, but it still looks very smooth. Now, our second objective really was looking for scalability. So in terms of like, once things are stable and running smoothly, of course, continue to work on features, and making sure everything is even more optimized. But scalability is big because of the if the user base starts to grow, right? We want to make sure that it can grow with it, and allow us to implement future features easily. So, and then of course one of the biggest things in terms of scalability that is not really focused on, at least it seems like a lot of companies don't focus on it, which is our third objective, which is maintainability. So a lot of companies really, it's how a lot of this tech debt accumulates in almost every type of application you can possibly think of, is making sure everybody thinks about growth in terms of your user base, your customers, your revenue, but also like just future issues. It makes it a lot easier to fix them if you have a proper not only system set up, but CI/CD pipeline as well. There's just so many different things that go into it, and that really became a big thing to me when I watched the documentary on the making of Madden, the football game, which is at the time it was being made, a huge engineering challenge, huge, especially with John Madden. And if you haven't seen the documentary, it's very interesting. But John Madden is not a video games guy, not a computer guy, definitely not an engineering guy. Pure football, but he is a ruthless businessman, and so because he was in charge, he was the boss, it was his name on the game. He was scared of flying, so he was not able to make trips to Electronic Arts. And this is when Electronic Arts was still a very small company with no money. and so he used to make the trip out there. He couldn't make it that often, so he was already pretty pissed about having, because he's scared of flying, so he'd take the train or the bus later on in his life, and he was very ruthless when he got there. And one of the big things was he was just demanding on what he wanted out of the game. And so, like, for instance, in the beginning, they only wanted to have, I think it was like 5-on-5 players, and he was very adamant about, no, football's 11-on-11. From an engineering point of view, that was difficult to pull off. So he was very ruthless. But one of the things that he did was they ended up hiring an extremely talented programmer that was able to set up their entire system and their game engine in a way where anything in the future was very easy to identify and fix. So there, not only was it scalable in terms of, like, because it was a yearly release, Madden 98, Madden 99, Madden 2000, but it also allowed for them to be able to add new features in the game, but to fix things quickly. And that was one of the things that really stood out to me when I watched that documentary. Was almost everybody on the team was just in shock at how good their lead developer had really set up everything. So, and even after he left the company, they were able, for a very long time while using his engine, they were able to fix almost anything pretty quickly. So it allowed them to really gain the edge, to keep up with John Madden's demands, and allowed them to become, the multi-billion-dollar game and multi-billion-dollar company that they ended up becoming. So that's one thing that I always want to do in anything I work on, ever since I've seen that documentary. Here's some of our short-term SMART goals. So the first really phase, I guess you could think of it as that, was really UI UX. We wanted to get that at least prototype, first draft type of stuff. Get the game to a state where it pretty much feels like things are loading in almost instantly, which is kind of where we're at right now. And then we wanted to have our testing environment figured out in terms of, like, what we're going to test, what's going to be important, and then our CI/CD pipeline. We wanted to have that down as well. Our long-term goals were which is always, this is the truth with pretty much any, this is what I've learned anyways in game development, because I have made some other games outside of this project. Art and audio is a big one, and art and design is huge. I mean it takes so long, and I follow Timothy Kane, who's a legendary game developer as well. I follow a lot of the greats, like Toby Fox, Concerned Ape, Billy Basso, all these legendary developers, Andrew Gower, John Romero, Notch. Those are all legends. But one thing that I remember they pretty much have all said, and Timothy Kane said very well, is the reason games have become so expensive to make and taking so long is pretty much art and design. It's just become so complex at this point. And it's very true. So the art and design is by far the hardest. It requires the most work, and it takes a very long time to get polished. It's just a very difficult part of it. So, which is something that I learned to appreciate with web applications that I've built, is that that's not really. It's kind of weird because in that world, and especially if you get into system levels, like anything with C++, Java, Rust, I mean, that's the art and design in terms of, like, user experience, UI UX, that's pretty much non-existent, really, realistically speaking. The design is more about, like, the engineering side of things, and so it's not the same type of design, I guess, in this case. So it's one thing that I learned to appreciate outside of games is like, you don't have that, so it's just focusing on getting things fast, cheap, things like that. Games, it adds a huge challenge to it. Accessibility, something we wanted to add in eventually as well, and want to eventually have an analytics dashboard so we can see what players like, what players don't like. Obviously, we're not going to be at the same level as Candy Crush, who has King, which is owned by Microsoft now, because Microsoft bought King. What was it? King. I can't even remember. The ones who make Call of Duty. Activision Blizzard King is the name of them. That's all one company. It's actually all one company, but Microsoft bought them, so they have tons of money now. So I highly doubt to be at that level ever, but that's something, it's always good to keep an eye on things. Keep an eye on what players like, what they don't like. You don't want to spend months working on something the players don't care about, right? And then we also wanted to have our, at least the base features done, and get all of our beta testing finished before launch. Required resources. So I wanted to keep things as free and open source as possible. So we are utilizing GitHub. Normally I would use GitLab, but we're utilizing GitHub right now just because some of the free things that they have on there, and the scope of our project is tiny. So utilizing some of their free hosting and things like that are actually a lot easier. But for if this is more of a full project, multi-year type thing, I probably would be going with GitLab just due to its open source nature. We utilize a few different testing frameworks, Cypress, Jest, things like that, but a lot of it we have to play directly, because some of the things that players do to break games are just kind of outside the scope of any testing framework or even AI application for that. Anything for testing is just humans are always finding things you never even thought of, so that's why human testing is still always going to be probably one of the most important ones in terms of the game itself. Figma, now we're using that just because it's a little more user friendly, and Christine prefers that. But Krita is definitely free and open source. I use that as well in my personal projects outside of this. I use that for anything I have to use design for. So that was a very big one as well. A part-time QA tester would be wonderful, but right now it's pretty much me and Christine being that QA tester. Back-end support, we're utilizing Supabase, which is also free and open source. And that also utilizes Postgres, which is free and open source, which is a DBMS that is based in Express Node and the Express framework, so it's all JavaScript. So that's what we're using on that side of things. It does have built-in authentication already. It has a lot of built-in features that we're using, so I don't need to use any additional third parties or anything like that. The main third party that we are using is Phaser, which is also a free and open source game engine. So everything I'm trying to keep free and open source, and then of course that allows us to be able to keep things across all devices. So our execution plan is really months 1 through 3. We're heavily into completing our design, assets, getting our pipeline set up, and then just getting the initial game working. That excitement when the final, we match them and everything's running smoothly. It's responding to human touch. After that, we're really wanting to focus on more performance optimization and continue with assets, adding new challenges, adding new features. One of the ones that me and Christine recently came up with was adding like an ice block as an extra challenge. So every 10 levels something new happens for the next 10 levels that the player has to get through. Everything's time based, so the player has 60 seconds to try to get to a certain score. That's how they pass that level. So the first one is basic 8x8 grid. It's a pretty big grid for a match 3. It's actually pretty much as big as you can get without causing problems. And then from that point on, after at level 11, for instance, it'll be like a different shape. Like it won't be an 8x8 grid, it'll be like a cross. So there's less opportunities for you to match. And then eventually we'll have things like ice blocks, and that's the one we came up with that can't be broken. So now that adds another challenge. It might get in the way of you trying to get a match 4, match 5 for extra bonus points. All that while you're trying to beat the timeout, otherwise you lose a life and you only have a certain amount of lives total. So that's something new we've been adding. And then focusing on, some of the things we're going to really kind of wrap up with are going to be accessibility. Mobile responsiveness actually is kind of something we've been doing through every single phase. And then just the testing and then deployment. That's really kind of what we're working on. And this kind of is another timeline going over all that. So assets, initial testing, assets and mobile responsiveness are like kind of sprinkled throughout there. Assets is a very high priority though, just because it's just so difficult to really implement, and it takes up a lot of time. Accessibility, analytics, documentation, beta testing, things like that are also kind of towards the back end, but a lot of it's primarily optimization, and assets are like just like by far the hardest part of this. But in summary, Crimson Crush is positioned, for a successful launch here. We have our structured OKR, SMART goals, and our execution plan. So we do believe we can confidently deliver this in a polished and stable state, and hopefully it'll be fun. Not for anyone that really likes these type of challenging games, these match 3 games. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and wrap it up, and thank you for listening. Goodbye.